Hi, this is Rishabh Rajan for AskAudio, reviewing the Korg Volca Modular synthesizer. I'm really excited about this one. This would be the 7th in the Volca series, if I'm not mistaken. Let's have a look at what we get inside the box. So just like the Volca FM, we get this little cheat card here that shows us some of the modules and their functions. The usual poster-size manuals. I guess this is a trend with Japanese manufacturers. Inside the box here, we have 6 AA batteries. You can power the synth with these batteries, but you can also use a 9-volt DC adapter. You also get a bunch of single-pin patch cables. And of course, then there's the synthesizer. Now this is an analog semi-modular synthesizer, meaning that you do not have to patch in to create sounds. If you've seen any of the Volca series devices, you should be familiar with the form factor. Very compact. There's even a speaker at the back, but I would recommend using the front panel headphone output. Battery compartment at the bottom here. Now this is a very powerful synthesizer, but everything's very compact. But Korg has done a good job with labeling things. For example, when it comes to patch points, all the inputs have the clear background and all the outputs have the colored or darker background. Audio rate patch points are labeled with a little bulb on the top left or bottom right corner. Alright, so let's have a listen to the synthesizer. So with any West Coast style synthesizers, you start with a basic oscillator, and we have a triangle core here, which then can be wavefolded or frequency modulated to create more complex tonality. You can see and hear the triangle shape. Let's now add some wavefolding. So that makes the waveform more complex and adds more upper harmonics. Aside from wavefolding, we also have frequency modulation. Let's try that. So now this oscillator is being modulated by another, which is also being key-tracked. You can change the ratio relationship between the modulator and the carrier over here. Either can be lower or higher. Of course, you can combine wavefolding with FM. Pretty aggressive tones we can create there. Alright, next we have this very basic attack, hold, release function generator. And you can see I'm triggering that with the keypad here. So you get control over the attack and release time. Now, unlike an East Coast synthesizer where you have a filter and an amplifier, here we have a low-pass gate instead, which essentially combines the functionality of both in one. So the function generator is opening and closing this filter cutoff value here, and I'm gating the signal with the keybed. By the way, these keys here do not have pressure sensitivity. Alright, then the last component in the audio chain is this digital reverb effect. You just get the driver control with this one knob. So that's one digital component on this synthesizer. And it's definitely a very handy one. You can create some very nice ambient-like textures with the reverb completely wet. Alright, let's now jump ahead and talk about the sequencer here. It's a very simple one. Just hit that play button to start the sequence. I'll open up that release of it. You get 16 different sequence patterns. You can access it by holding down the memory button and tapping any of the keys. Looks like we have some empty ones here. So let's use one of these to learn how to create a sequence. Now I can just hit that record button and play in the sequence, but I find it better to use the step mode. To access step record, hold down the function key and hit the record button. You'll notice that first step is blinking. So now I can tap any key to define that as my first step. Next for the second step, third, so on and so forth. If I want to add rests, I can just hit the record button and that'll jump to the next step. And now you can see we're back to step 1. Alright, so now let's get out of this record mode and play it back. We can adjust the clock speed with this dial here. That's the fastest, and that's the slowest. That reverb just opens up the sound. Very cool. Now this is a modular synthesizer, so the real fun is with patching things. So let's look at some patching examples. I'm going to start with this woggle section, which is basically a sample and hold generator. It is internally sampling noise, so we don't have to send it a signal to sample. And we don't even need to give it a gate signal because the sequencer is internally routed to it. Alright, so let's go ahead and use this to modulate the pitch of the oscillator. There are two sample and hold outputs. One is stepped and the other is smooth. I'll use the stepped one. I'll plug it in here, which is the pitch input for the oscillator. Now the note gate also triggers the sample and hold, so every time I play the same note, we hear the sample and hold work. Let's try it with the sequencer. So this is pretty interesting because for each step in the sequence, we get a new pitch value, but at the same time, the sample and hold module is offsetting that to a new value. So every time we cycle around, we always get a new pattern. Alright, now I want to control the range of values that are coming out of this woggle output. So let's plug it in here, input A. So this section here will let us add or subtract two separate signals, but we can also use it to control a signal. So I'll take this first output here and plug that into the pitch control for the oscillator. And now with this C dial, I can control the range of that modulation. We can use the subtraction output, which will just give us an inverse relationship with the C dial. So when it's at maximum, you get no modulation, and as you reduce it, you get more. Let's try the smooth woggle output. So now instead of stepping through different pitch values, we're gliding through them. But at the same time, we are still stepping because the step sequencer is running. Pretty wacky sounds you can create with this. Now we have a second function generator here which is not connected to anything by default. And the cool thing about this one is that it can actually loop because it has a end of cycle output and it has a gate input. So if we were to plug the end of cycle output back into its gate input, it essentially becomes an LFO. And then you can adjust the shape as well as the time of this function generator. Alright, so let's make use of this. I'm going to disconnect this pitch modulation for now, so we get a consistent tone. Let's modulate the timbre of this sound. We'll use our looping function generator for this. So let's take one output. There are two of them. Yeah, the positive and negative. Let's take the positive one and plug that into the fold input. you can hear that looping function generator modulating the fold value. You can even see the LED blinking on the fold dial. Let's plug our pitch modulation back again. Turn the sequence back on. So now we have pitch modulation as well as timbre modulation running simultaneously. Now there is a second low-pass gate here, which is not connected to anything. Now we can use the two low-pass gates in series, but something more interesting would be to use the modulator from our triangle core and route that to the second low-pass gate. Now normally we don't get to hear the modulator, but with this patching we will be able to hear the modulator simultaneously with the carrier. The second low-pass gate is internally routed to the reverb, so we don't have to patch that in. Let's hear this. Let's set up some modulation for the second low-pass gate. Let's take the inverse output from this second function generator and plug that in to modulate the cutoff on the second low-pass gate. And now immediately we're hearing this work. Now this is a clean triangle, so none of the folding and FM is going to affect it. But we could modulate the cutoff at audio rate to create some interesting tones. I'm actually going to slow it down to create like a plucked type shape. And now when I run the sequence, we kind of have two separate patterns running. I'm going to bring this first low-pass gate all the way down so we just hear the second one. And now we can hear the pitch change on that triangle oscillator. Alright, now let's bring in the first low-pass gate. The timing is not quite right, but we can mess with the second function generator here to kind of match the sequencer. The sequencer does have gate output, so we could just use that to trigger the second function generator. But sometimes it's nice to have things that are not quite perfectly in time. After all, we're in the West Coast world here. So there you have it. That's the new Korg Volca Modular, West Coast synthesis in a compact, battery-powered box. This is Rishabh Rajan for AskAudio signing off, and I'll catch you in the next one.